everybody. Welcome to Chapter 18, Incarceration Trends. First, let's acknowledge that the incarceration rate in the United States is 4 times greater now than it was in 1980, right? And that's despite a declining rate. Now, a declining crime rate. Now, there are some that say that's connected, right? That the incarceration rate being higher has led to predicate offenders, recidivist offenders being in jail, and so the crime rate has dropped, right? Crime rate dropped because of, the increased incarceration occurs because of increased arrests, tougher sentencing, prison construction, and the war on drugs, right? All in all, what this has led to is mass incarceration. There are more prisoners in the United States than any other developed nation in the world, and there is a higher incarceration rate in the United States than any other country in the developed world, right? And in most undeveloped worlds, right? Also, African Americans and Hispanics, their incarceration rates are higher than whites, and that has been since the 1960s, right? So the 1950s and 60s, their incarceration rate was somewhat close, right? But the war on drugs, the war on crime, things like that have led to increased rates in the inner cities, which targeted people of color. The prison population is aging now because all of these people that were in for long times, they're in this harsh sentencing, they're older now, so their medical bills are now being put onto the state, and it's more expensive to treat someone for any sort of medical malady or just basic care in prison, and the care, of course, is not as good as it is in the outside world. More women are incarcerated now. The rates for women incarceration are higher now. Since 1980, the percentage of prisoners in for violent crime has decreased consistently, while the incarceration rates for prisoners who are convicted of nonviolent drug offenses increased at the same time up until about 2 years ago. The prison population is not evenly distributed around the United States. The 5 states with the highest rates of incarceration are all in the South because Southern attitudes toward crime are harsher, right? Mass incarceration has led to overcrowding, prison construction, and a large number of recidivists. So what's happening is, because of parole constrictions, about a third of the people in prison are there for violating parole, or are there were sentenced there while they were on parole and committed another crime or some sort of a parole violation. Public policy trends, the get tough on crime attitude. In this country for years, it was always thought that in order to get elected, you had to appear to be tough on crime, and it didn't matter what party you belonged to. So also, prison construction leads to jobs. So if you build a prison within your jurisdiction, within your district as an elected official, you are bringing construction jobs to that area before the prison's built. So all the trades, carpentry, electricians, laborers, plumbers, you're employing all those people, and then on top of that, once the prison opens, you have all of less of those facilities, less of those jobs, but they're there, and you have all the jobs that come with it: the corrections officers, the maintenance people, the environmental services people, all the treatment programs, the wardens, the clerical, everybody. There's a lot of people employed in prisons, and you're bringing those jobs to your district. Also keep in mind that when the U.S. Census, we're going to do the U.S. Census this year, the U.S. Census counts inmates as residents of the county where they are incarcerated. And that's a boon to any district, because the census decides how much federal aid you're going to get. And there's also a historical belief, historical political belief that connects incarceration with controlling crime. The more people you put in prison, the more control you have over crime. Now, it's interesting. That's a logical conclusion, but there are some really in-depth studies that show that the incarceration rates don't always control crime, right? In fact, there is a lot of evidence that there's a lot more crime now, but it's non-violent crime, and it's crime that utilizes the internet. So there's no face-to-face, there's no violence, but there's a lot of money being stolen, a lot of money being made in criminal enterprises that are just harder to track because of the anonymity of the internet. The increased costs have political leaders rethinking. The increased costs of prisons and keeping people in jail cost a lot of money to keep people in jail, depending on what study or what resource you're using. It costs anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000 a year to keep one prisoner in jail. right? 18 state prison systems operate right now at or above capacity, and overcrowding may violate some constitutional standards. In fact, one of the constitutional decisions that were made was that the size of the cell decided how many people could be in the cell, and so the way they do it is they kind of bend the rules a little bit, and they say, okay, well, that's not a cube, that's a square. Right? That's just a two-dimensional image. So because the prison is, the ceiling of the prison is 10 feet higher, that allows us to put more people in there. The courts have consistently said that's unconstitutional, but it's still being done simply because they have no choice with the mass incarceration. Mass incarceration leads to increased violence and decreased access to programs. There are more prisoners and the same or less amount of people providing programs to these people, so the percentage of people who have access to it is much lower. Overcrowded prisons, right? There are some strategies that are being used to change that, or not change that. Null strategy, do nothing, don't change anything. People that are in prison did something wrong, it's not our problem that they're suffering. If they hadn't done anything wrong, they wouldn't be suffering. Then the construction strategy, build more prisons, because if you build more prisons, you get more jobs and more money into your community. And then there is the idea of intermediate sanctions, right? Less costly options. Parole, home confinement, fines, things like that, which will limit the amount of people that are being sentenced in terms of incarceration, but still provide some sort of punishment. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about community corrections, community justice. That's it, short lecture this week, but we got another one coming up. Thanks.